Welcome. I'm John Dalton. I was co-leader of a student effort to save Castle Stevens in 1959. Unfortunately, it fell to the wrecking ball in December of that year, and at its demise, it was the most historic edifice on the west bank of the Hudson River. With me today is my classmate and fellow protester, the noted historian and presidential biographer, Richard Reeves.
Thanks, John. I'm still sorry after all these years that we failed. The castle was not only the center of the Stevens family, but in our time at Stevens, it served as the administration building, a dining hall, a social center. It was the center and the peak of campus life here.
Tragedy struck Stevens' family in 1851 when their home, the great villa on the Hudson, was destroyed in a fire. Built by Colonel John Stevens, it was his home until his death in 1838. In 1853, Robert Livingston Stevens built the 40-room mansion that came to be known as Castle Stevens. Designed as an Italianate villa, it was heavily influenced by Victorian design ideas, decorated with ornate crystal glass chandeliers, heavy velvets of red and blue and gold, and elaborate wood carving. The conservatory boasted a spectacular calla lily chandelier supplied by Tiffany. The castle's most stunning feature was its 60-foot-high circular rotunda topped by a stained glass skylight.
To get to the second floor from the rotunda, you ascended a spiral staircase that had no visible means of support. It was a cantilevered staircase, so it was an engineering marvel in and of itself.
3 tunnels ran from the castle basement, one to the greenhouse, the second to a subterranean root cellar, the third and longest led to an opening in the cliff to the east, where supplies were offloaded from ships. Like many wealthy New Jerseyans, the Stevens family owned slaves. The late Congresswoman, Millicent Fenwick, the great-granddaughter of Edwin A. Stevens, recounts the story of Peter Lee.
Peter his whole role was to sit in a big chair and greet the people and direct them as they came to the door. He was freed, of course, and came back and didn't want to go away.
Mary Stevens Baird added the story of Peter Lee's freedom.
But the Civil War came along, and my grandmother said, well, Peter, you're going to be given your freedom. And so she gave him some money and a gold watch when he left on the ferry. And so he came home and he said to my grandmother, I stay here. So grandmother said, well, all right, Peter, but you have to be paid wages. And when he died, he left a written piece of paper, written with a pencil, leaving all his accumulated wages back to my grandmother with the request that he be buried in the Stevens family cemetery, where he now lies.
Following Robert's death in 1856, Edwin became the master of Castle Point, and his second wife, Martha Baird Daaad, its mistress, a direct descendant of William Baird, the loyalist from whom the property had been confiscated during the War of Independence. When Edwin Stevens died in 1868, his will set aside a block of land, a building fund of $150,000, and an endowment of $500,000. This was for the establishment of the university that now bears his family's name. In 1870, Stevens Institute of Technology opened its doors. The original university trustees determined that Stevens should offer a single, rigorous engineering curriculum, leading to a baccalaureate degree they designated mechanical engineer. Today, the Innovation University remains his most enduring legacy. Martha Baird Daaad Stevens resided in the castle until her death in 1899. As a founding trustee of the Institute, she took a deep interest in its progress. She presided at the many functions held at Castle Point with grace and dignity, including the 1891 first outdoor performance of Shakespeare's As You Like It on the castle lawn. A philanthropist and social reformer, she funded the construction of the Hoboken Public Library and established the Industrial Education Association, dedicated to teaching the young women of Hoboken. Following her death, the castle was occupied by her son, Colonel Edwin A. Stevens, and his wife, Emily Lewis Stevens. Mary Stevens Baird reflected on life at the castle as a child.
After my father died in 1907, we lived here. In the morning, you got up and brushed your hair and brushed your teeth and went down to the chapel. And it was quite cold, and you'd kneel up and somebody would make a small prayer or a service. And then you'd go in the dining room and get your hot porridge and cocoa. Well, there was a porch that went all the way around, and we used to ride something called an Irish mail. We used to watch out of the windows, and we watched Mauritania and the Lusitania coming in to the dock, right opposite the lawn. As it got towards the evening, you having played all morning and all afternoon and had supper, you'd go into one of the big sitting rooms, generally the blue room, which looked east over the river, and you'd be read stories by your mother. And then the nursemaid would come down with cod liver oil, and if you were very adroit, you could hide between the curtains and the big windows, and perhaps she couldn't find you.
Castle Stevens served as the Stevens family home until Alumni Day, May 27, 1911, when it was purchased by Stevens Institute of Technology amid great fanfare. The next Indicator issue reported, on that day, Castle Stevens was a scene of great rejoicing. The alumni dinner, the musical club's concert, and the dance that followed served to initiate it to its present use. Castle Stevens will always be the center of student life. When years have passed and Castle Point is adorned with many stately buildings, one of these buildings will always be noted for the traditions which link it to the past. It will be to Stevens what Nassau Hall is to Princeton, or what Christ College is to Oxford. That building will be the castle. How wrong they were. Acquisition of Castle Stevens greatly improved student life on the campus. Previously, non-commuters were scattered in various boarding houses in town, and the noonday meal for all was a stand-up affair. The castle quickly became a comfortable home to about 40 students, a clubhouse for alumni, and a place in which to entertain guests and lecturers. Howard Hayden, class of '48, entered Stevens in September 1940. He resided in the castle and earned his meals by working as a waiter. His freshman dorm room was on the second floor in the front tower. Sophomore year, he occupied a small room on the third floor that must have been servants' quarters when the Stevens family lived there. Though tiny, it did have a great river view. Howard vividly recalls the magnificent floating staircase, sliding down its banisters on many occasions. Joe Finnerty, class of 1950, recalls the castle as an integral part of the Hoboken community.
Hoboken born and bred, I grew up playing on the Stevens campus during the 30s. My childhood chums and I often explored the castle until chased away by the dreaded watchman, Mike. The building was a fixture in my life. I spent many hours studying there with some of my freshman classmates. I don't know which event made me cry more, tearing down the castle or the Green Gate arch that once graced the corner of 8th and Hudson. These were not simply structures. They were the cornerstones of my youth.
I mean, we started in September, and that following December was Pearl Harbor. During the war, the government wanted to train people to become engineering officers, etc. And Stevens was part of the program in World War I, called the Steam Engineering School. So Stevens, they applied and they got the grant and the commission to set up a training for future naval officers.
The castle at that time was used as a barracks. I can remember bringing my young daughters back to the campus on Alumni Day, and they used to really enjoy the castle, the rotunda, and the spiral staircase.
Looking back on the 4 years that you spent at Stevens, what would you say your most enduring memory of the campus was?
Marching. I can remember standing on the point at 5 o'clock in the morning for some reason, and the Queen Elizabeth and the Queen Mary would be going out filled with troops.
One year, the graduation was held on there, and I know this well because I ran the graduation for a number of years for President Jess Davis, but at one point it was held on the lawn of the castle overlooking the Hudson River, and the speaker was Admiral Hyman Rickover, the inventor of the atomic submarine. And some of my colleagues, notably Professor Gilmore, are old Navy men, and Rickover's going on and on and on. And they turn to me, he says, boy, when an admiral gets a hold of you, boy, you're really stuck for the rest of the day.
Peter Rote's class of '52 recalls the June 1952 senior prom as one of the most memorable moments at Stevens. Held on a warm June evening with Japanese lanterns strung out across the expanse of the lawn, it was his some-enchanted evening. With Billy Butterfield's big band orchestra playing on the castle portico, Peter and his prom date danced on the castle lawn until 2 a.m. His prom date now is his wife of 57 years. Castle Stevens was used routinely for social events, including the Arnold Air Society's annual ball, Mothers Club's card parties, and dances. Older alumni have fond memories of dancing in the rotunda. Professor Emeritus Don Marino will never forget the last dance at the castle in November of 1959.
Senior class cocktail party was held on November 20th, 1959 in the castle. It was gorgeous. We had a really great turnout.
Dick Reeves was there, and at 12 o'clock midnight, he announced that Don's birthday was on the 21st of November. And everyone congratulated Don, and they let us dance alone in the rotunda, around the rotunda. It was beautiful. And I guess Don was so animated by the whole thing that he blurted out he wants to marry me. So, do you want to continue?
Well, no, you have to continue because I didn't get a particularly favorable response.
So I said I had to think about it. This came so suddenly. So I thought about it for about 3 minutes, and then I said yes. And then we got married that same year, December 26th, and we've been married 55 years.
I would have rather saved the castle.
July of 1958, and they're looking for someone to work in the alumni office. I went for an interview. The castle, I was just overwhelmed when I went in. I had never been in there. It was just spectacular view, the rotunda, the different paintings on the wall, the furniture, the chandeliers, and to go into work and walk up that spectacular staircase, and was working in your living room or dining room because it was old desk and little lamps on they didn't have fluorescent lights, but if you looked out the window to this spectacular skyline of the New York City, and the ships would come in and out, it was just wonderful. The kitchen, we're down there, and Henry the butler was there, and Henry Ferguson. He used to bring snacks up once in a while. He was really a nice person.
The 1951 Stevens Fund was dedicated to work on castle restoration. Alumni hoped that the repaired, restored and refurbished castle would provide needed campus facilities for faculty, students, and alumni. In 1954, the castle's 100th birthday was celebrated by the Indicator. The improvements were completed in 1958. In June 1959, the Board of Trustees announced plans to replace Castle Stevens with a new 13-story student faculty center. According to Director of Development and Public Relations, Edwin B. Stearns, Jr., necessity for a center of student life drove the decision, adding that it would require $100,000 to restore the castle. It cost $30,000 per year to maintain it. The Stute mounted a campaign to save Castle Stevens, but the die already had been cast. In December 1959, Castle Stevens fell to the wrecking ball.
I was 100% against it because I thought this is it. The castle, we all know it's a castle on a hill, and the address is Castle Point, and felt if I was Stevens and I had given or sold my property, I'd feel kind of bad that they're going to tear it down. However, I think today if he came here, he'd be pretty happy the way it is.
I think it's an appreciation of what our founders were all about. If you look at the entire story of the Stevens family, starting with the first John Stevens, who emigrated from Scotland in 1699 under an indenture, through Colonel John Stevens and his sons, it's really the story of America. You look at what came out of this campus during the early 1800s, I would match his record with that of Thomas Edison in the latter part of the 19th century. And that's something that our students today need to understand, that innovation is not a new thing here at Stevens. It's part of our history going back beyond our founding father and to Colonel John.
There flows the Hudson River out to the mighty sea. On Castle Point so proudly stands there in majesty. Stevens our alma mater, homage to thee.